I mean,
Now we are live. Hi, RT.
now we're live. Look.
It's not playing on the YouTube link.
It will be very soon.
Do I click on
No,
live?
it's gonna be what's the word? Delayed.
What kind of pose do we need makeup?
What's that?
No makeup on the plans.
Do we need makeup?
my friend?
Do we need makeup?
You got so much facial hair now. There's no need for makeup. He's covered it all up.
Really all of it.
That's pretty bad.
This is some like cute and stuff. Right?
All right.
Going
So we
full.
YouTube and keep going. All right.
We're freaking.
Nope. Oh, there we are.
Oh, wow.
Oh man.
Right.
I can't hear you now.
Maybe
It's delayed.
is that the
No,
before?
that's when I was like on my phone.
This mirror thing is freaking me out. I'm actually facing the other way. What kind of pose do we need makeup?
That's what they see.
All right, now we're going. Hey, we're live. It actually is working.
We're good.
Are we good?
All right, then we're good.
All right, cool.
And there you go.
Apparently, Fowler is checking some important news. Hey, everybody. It's Scott and David and Damien and John Galloway, and we are here on Google Hangouts for our very first of hopefully what will become regular weekly Google Hangouts with the ASP.NET team, and we'll see if this works out. We are streaming live to YouTube here on the 2nd of September, Tuesday afternoon. Tried to do it towards the later part of the afternoon so that most people in the world are not sleeping right now. And we're going to be hopefully watching the Google+, the Twitter, the YouTubes, and what else? Where else would this be? Anywhere we can answer your questions, we will be answering those. What's that?
Facebook. We have a group, right?
We do. Actually, I'll Galloway, can you put that up on Facebook for us as well?
Yep. Jabba. We need a Jabba room.
The Jabba room.
Wow. So do we need more places to put this? I think.
Well, we can do that V2 next week.
I can put in Jabba room.
Yes, everyone on Orkut. Watching. Both of the Brazilians that are left on Orkut, we will be watching as well.
Yeah.
Why don't we start with a little bit of like status of the project from Damien and what we're doing, and you know, is this building daily, weekly? How is it being developed?
All right, so let me use some Microsoft PM speak. Let's level set, all right? So everyone knows I had to do it. I'm sorry, it's terrible. Yeah, so we a couple of preview releases in. It's been Tech Ed this year in the US, which is what, March?
Yep.
April? March? April.
It was April.
Where we announced what we were doing to the world with ASP.NET vNext, and since then we've been live on GitHub. So all the development we're doing is live on GitHub. It's not mirrored, it's not copied from anywhere else. So if you want to see what we're doing, including the issues that we're working against, that's all live in GitHub. The URL is in the chat here, github.com/ASP.NET. And we have done a couple of sort of milestone releases since then. I think we've done a couple of previews.
One a month.
One a month, and we're working on the next preview right now. So we do have nightly builds. If you don't want to work directly against source, we have officially sanctioned nightly builds that get Authenticode signed. They're pushed to a custom myget feed at myget.something. You can get all that information at github.com/ASP.NET/home. And so that's probably where you want to go if you want to get started. It tells you what version of Visual Studio to get, tells you how to configure the feed to get nightly updates. If you want to build from source, there'll be information there as well. And we're working hard to the next release. So
You can also try it out on a Mac.
And yeah, we have community members working hard to get things working and then working better on a Mac and indeed Linux. We have a Linux build server. I don't know how much of our stuff is actually building on that server yet, but it is green. There's a tick on it, I noticed.
Yeah, it's green.
So we are actively looking at Mac and Linux as well. So.
Can you talk a little bit about how this is going to fit in? Is this going to be something that is only run on Visual Studio Next, VS 14? Because I know there's a lot of CTPs coming out. Is this something that someone's going to be able to run on 2013?
So in terms of like the tooling experience and kind of file new, choose a project template, and then off you go, yeah, that's targeting the next version of Visual Studio. So if you want to use this stuff now, even now it is very, very early preview stages, you need to install a preview of the next version of Visual Studio, which is currently just codenamed 14. So Visual Studio 14, I think there's a CTP 3, just launched. And obviously if there's 3, there'll probably be more, and we're working towards the next one. But there will not be a file new for VS 2013 or 2012 from this group at least, from this team. That said, we're taking a much lower reliance on Visual Studio, it's fair to say, I think, in ASP.NET vNext in general. Obviously, to get running on a Mac, which we've already talked about a little bit, that has to be the case, and so you can use Sublime. We even have Sublime tooling now, experimental Sublime tooling right now that you can use, which gives you, access to some of the stuff you would usually do in the IDE, build and errors and statement completion. I don't think is in there yet, but people are working on it. But yeah, if you're a Visual Studio user, it'll be in Visual Studio 14, sort of in the box.
And there's great directions on the GitHub page on how to actually install it on a Mac, including the Sublime plugin. So
yeah,
it's all up there, and it takes about 10 minutes to go through the steps.
Yeah. So while obviously we use Visual Studio internally, if you go look at our Getting Started docs, I think you'll see more and more they'll be seen as equals. Like you'll see like the Mac getting started, you'll see the Windows getting started.
There's a Linux getting started.
There's a Linux getting started. Eventually there'll probably be a cloud getting started if you're using Azure websites. You want to build a site through there using the cloud-based editors. So we want to be everywhere, is the short of it. So we don't really care what you use, but of course Visual Studio will have wonderful tooling as it always does for vNext.
That's part of why it's in Dev 14 as well. Because we put a brand new project system in for this thing, and it's just too much work to port it backwards to the old VS.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so that is an interesting juxtaposition of the runtime, which is being worked on right now, simultaneous to the tooling, and the fact that we've got it running on Mac and Linux on Sublime shows that those are kind of two separate efforts, right? I mean, I could certainly install the vNext runtime and mess with it on Notepad if I wanted to on Windows, right?
Yeah.
That's separate from the file new tooling.
Pretty much any OS. I think it's Windows 7 and above. Probably it's the safest bet.
Windows 7 and above and 2008 R2 and above.
Right. Yep. And I mean that's.
By the way, that doesn't work yet. I don't think the core CLR runs on those environments yet. But by the time we RTM, it'll be 2008 RT and above and Windows 7 and above. We might have Windows 8 dependencies still today.
I see.
But those are going to go away before we RTM.
Yep. I mean that's really no different to .NET at any point. You've always been able just to grab the SDK, open up your favorite text editor and just do everything manually. It's just that I think this time around, you could say that we're approaching the development sort of experience, as in by putting ourselves in the customer's shoes. What does it look like to use our tool set? We're kind of starting with command line first.
From scratch, yeah.
We're starting from scratch, and we're starting with like how does this work from the command line first. And so you'll note that even now in the preview releases, there's a lot of stuff that's supported using command line tools like KPM and KPAC that aren't supported by Visual Studio yet, and scaffolding. We haven't built the Visual Studio support yet for these command line experiences because we're doing them in that order for a reason. We want things to work without Visual Studio.
Can you explain the difference between Katana, what was Katana 3 that was announced on the WebDev blog, and then the K in KVM and K this and K that? Because I think it's a little confusing that we're working on the next version previews and we RTM'd Katana. Can you explain that?
So, I mean, for me, the easiest way to explain this is simply Katana was a stepping stone for the ASP.NET team. It was a small sub-team within the larger ASP.NET group. And Katana V1, or all the components that made up Katana V1, in all honesty, only shipped because we needed to ship Signaler V1. The only bits that really got shipped as part of Katana V1 were there to support Signaler, the host, and the sort of the middleware composition layer.
Web API runs on top of it.
And then with Web API, which happened after that, we got Katana self-host support officially in Katana 2, which is when we had a self-host, we had an auth middleware, we added a whole bunch of other stuff.
That was the main idea behind it. Was we wanted to have self-host.
Mm-hmm.
It was not self-host before. It was specific to a platform. If you wanted self-host WCF, there was a WCF self-host. And the idea with Katana was to have a single self-host that all of our platform can run on, and then K takes that to the next step.
Yeah, so it really was a stepping stone, and yeah, the K in Project K was chosen because we have this thing called Katana, which we took a lot of the paradigms from and sort of moved them over to the new world and said, well, if we could reinvent everything, if we had a chance to really think about what we wanted to do from the very bottom all the way up, including the OS all the way up, what would we do? And that became K.
We just put out Katana 3 as a release, an RTM.
Correct.
Is that going to? Are there going to be more versions of that? And how will someone make a decision about using regular old MVC, thinking about Katana, and thinking about what they're going to plan for vNext?
So, I mean, to be clear, MVC doesn't run on Katana. So Katana, that was V3 of a group of things.
Auth middleware,
the middleware composition,
the best fed,
the hosting server pieces, those type of bits. And it was labeled V3 because it was considered a major release. There was probably some breaking changes. It updated dependencies and took in some new features. That will be probably safe to say the last major release of Katana. The whole team is focused on ASP.NET vNext now. Similarly, we work on the Signaler team still, and we just released a servicing release for Signaler 1.x, 1.2.2. In the next week or two, we'll do a servicing release for Signaler 2x, which will be 2.1.2. And then we plan on doing a 2.2 release, which includes a whole bunch more bug fixes and new features on some of our client platforms. And that would probably be the last, certainly for the near future, update to the 2x, 1x side of Signaler, while we shift focus to getting Signaler working on 3x on top of ASP.NET vNext.
If you're using Katana v3, you're really running on the old stack. That means you're running on ASP.NET as it ships today on .NET 4.5x.
Yeah, it's just that we had this kind of transition phase where we released Signaler on Web API that purposely tried to sever some of those ties. Like I said, it was a stepping stone. Early ideas about how we could build web frameworks that were very isolated in their functionality. Like Signaler really does one thing. Web API is focused around one set of scenarios. And now we're taking some of the things we learned there, and we're doing the entire stack from the ground up.
Okay.
Turning point somewhere.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of modularity going on. Everything is choice now. Before, file new, project no choice, deploy to IIS. Now you don't like anything, you just swap it out.
Yes. Yes.
Is that funny?
Yes. It's, like, I don't think you could even, if someone had said to us a year ago we should make things more modular, and we go, yeah, that's a really good idea. I don't think anyone could have predicted just what the explosion would look like.
Yeah.
I think it's totally a good thing. I mean, it can be jarring for people at first, but it gives you ultimate flexibility. I mean, we still tackle with those decisions every week.
Oh yeah.
So should we split this package into two? Should we merge these two into one? These namespaces really, do they need to be two separate namespaces? Like, we have those type of discussions all the time. So we don't pretend to get it perfect. We're just trying to do our best and come up with the best set of modularity that we think will let people do what they need to do.
To see how far we've gone, the repos under ASP.NET on GitHub, there are about 30, I think, different repos. So like we ourselves author 30 repositories, which is kind of insane because it's not one giant solution that has a bunch of things in it. It's 30 different solutions that we have to make work across project, which is kind of a first thing we've ever done the first time. I mean, it's kind of
we even have a special repo.
New ground, yeah.
We have a special repo, like number 31, which only purpose for being is to integrate all those other repos together.
It's called coherence.
And kind of like build the whole thing together and see if anything breaks.
You seen that movie?
Is this level of modularity a problem? Is this going to make it difficult to people? Is this level of modularity a problem? Some people don't like choice.
Well, no, because ultimately there'll be a file new experience.
Which will wire it all together much like it has today.
Right.
So if you're file newing, you're going to get the same experience you get today. Everything's just going to work. You're going to get MVC, Web API, EF, routing, all that stuff's going to work, auth's going to work. And so it's really more for the people that want to go skin some of that off.
Yeah.
Before, it was really hard to do that, and now you actually can.
Yeah.
So before it was like one MTDLL. Now it's one package that pulls in 20 other packages. And even so if you don't see it, but it's still there in your project.
And even if you look at sort of web forms and ASP.NET of old, no one ever really complained that much about, oh, I did file new, and like it's not really what it gave you as file new, or like if you were working within the feature set that it gives you, we didn't hear that many complaints. Obviously, there were always suggestions and bugs, but most of the really harsh criticism was always about, you do this without giving me a choice, or I tried to change how it does this and it's a black box, I can't change it. So this is more about, in a lot of ways, changing what's underneath file new. What is file new composed of, and can I tease it apart and have a truly empty ASP.NET project that is quite literally nothing. Like it is a project.json file with no dependencies, which means when you do run, nothing happens and no modules load because there's nothing there.
Obviously, the big thing is a whole bunch of modules and stuff that you aren't even aware of don't load on you.
Right.
Only what you ask for loads, and I think that's awesome.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean that in file new the startup.cs class will be 400 lines. Like we're really laboring over ensuring that file new, functional MVC application experience is still well balanced. Like there should be just enough code in file new that you kind of understand how the pieces fit together. But you shouldn't see all the seams in file new. We should be able to say, hey, these are the smart defaults that will 90 to 95% of our customers will likely use. Why don't we just kind of merge these two concepts in a slightly higher level abstraction, an extension method or a very small assembly that does just these things, and we'll ship that in file new. And if someone decides they don't want one half of that, just go one level lower and pull them apart again, and now you don't need the other half. And that's where we're treading the line every day.
So in the past, in ASP.NET, you go file new project, and the joke was no matter which one you picked, it was the wrong one because you'd head down the wrong fork, and maybe you'd pick something that wasn't necessarily supported. Inevitably, of course, those things are still supported, like ASP.NET Dynamic Data. They just got rolled into the larger one ASP.NET system. But there's a lot of NuGet packages out there with 40, 50,000 downloads, like ASP.NET Web API 2.20 and self-host. You know, is that the kind of thing that's going to get rolled up into the main line, or is that always going to be an optional thing that you bring in?
Well, that explicit example, one of the things that we're trying to do in K is at each layer previously, if we go sort of down to the OS and to the type of web server you're using and type of auth you use and all those type of things, those cross-cutting concerns of your application, we would always it was always been our way or the highway, right? It's like, it's always IIS, you want to do something else, good luck. It's always been this type of auth, you want to do something else, good luck. These days, we're trying to ensure that all other choices are, if not possible, if not easy, but at least, possible. And the defaults will still be the defaults. If you do file new on an ASP.NET vNext project in the next version of Visual Studio, it'll still use IIS Express by default, but the project will be written in such a way that if you want to use self-host, it'll quite literally be NuGet in one extra thing, change one line in project.json to add the appropriate boot up command, and the tooling will just work. It'll boot your self-host server instead of IIS Express, and if you deploy it somewhere, they run the packing program on it to make it deployable, it'll be set up for self-host. We're thinking about those things from the beginning, but the defaults will still be the defaults that you kind of know and love today. IIS will be the default if you run on Windows. If you do file new on a Mac, which doesn't really exist, but if you follow our instructions, it'll set you up with out the web server that we're looking at writing for on the Mac stack. What are we calling it? Kestrel. So yeah.
Sorry about that. So a couple of questions coming in on both on YouTube, on Facebook, and on Twitter. One gentleman wanted to know how this is going to run on Mono and Linux. This is something where we're going to hook up FastCGI and Nginx and Apache, or will Linux and Mac not be a hosting option but more a development option?
It will be all those things. I'm looking at
Dan
because he's the one with the Mac.
So we wrote a web server called Kestrel. It's based on libov, which is the same thing that Node uses for their web server.
So slowing you down a bit, that's libuv, the stuff that's underneath.
libuv,
Yeah, you're going pretty fast there.
That's the cross-platform networking stack that runs on Node.js. So we took that and we made a web server called Kestrel.
A .NET web server.
Yeah, that's C# talking to libov directly. And what we envisioned is that you would host that as the main web server, and then you put something like Nginx or Apache in front of it. That's your kind of load balancer, and that would just talk to your main server.
And that's a pattern move.
So it's kind of like Node.js.
We've stolen that from Node.
Yeah,
that's what
how you
people
do it, right?
in Node. Most people don't run Node XE as the front.
Right.
They run Nginx.
So slowing you guys down a little bit, the Kestrel managed web server on Mac and Linux running on top of the unmanaged libuv kind of standard thing, that's the equivalent of Cassini for the old-time .NET people. It's the IIS Express development server for not Windows, correct?
Not necessarily.
Not quite.
We haven't really, so we're not saying that it's for development only. So we certainly are not ruling out things like production hosting on Linux for ASP.NET vNext, right? I mean, when we say we want to support cross-plat, we want to do our best to support cross-plat. It's still very early days. But this isn't just about making you able to develop ASP.NET on a Mac.
I see.
We're looking beyond that.
Okay, so for now, it's
apps on Linux servers.
You had it from App Boss.
That's my goal. Is I want you to be able to host your ASP.NET app on a Linux server as easily as you can host it on a Windows server.
I see, and whether that's
Docker container if you want. I mean that's.
And whether that's FastCGI or Nginx or Apache, we're all trying to figure that stuff out. But things move from proof of concept to reasonable development server to actual production server.
Yes.
Right.
Yep, that's the goal.
That's how. This won't be Cassini in that we only ever shipped it for development purposes and for VS. This will be something that will continue all the way through until we have proper production quality code.
But it won't have all the features of IIS.
It won't.
That's
not
IIS
IIS.
is a completely different story. So
Same as Node, right? Node, you don't have like those. You don't have.
Yeah.
You don't have URL rewrites and all these other
yeah.
things. Yeah.
You pull in stuff that does that in middleware, and then the server itself is just a server. So you serve HTML, HTTP, and then there are layers of things that bring in other functionality on top of that.
Okay, cool. Another question coming in about, this is interesting because this is about what happened today, where we put out a preview of the gulp, grunt, kind of Bower NPM support, the discussion for that.
Yep.
A couple of interesting thoughts. People were very excited about that. They thought that was great, but a number of people were like, well, wait a second, I use it already from the command line. Do I really need this integrated into Visual Studio? My answer was it's about choice. If you want to use it, use it. If not, don't worry about it. Correct?
Absolutely. It's a little bit more than that in this case. We can talk about our plans for grunt and Bower and gulp and those sort of things in the next version.
If I was going to describe it today, the stuff we put out today is just basically just for feedback. So, for example, when we were talking to the team last week about should they even release this in the early preview stage, the problem is if you're building ASP.NET apps today, you're probably not using grunt in your application, and so you look at this and you go, well, it doesn't really add anything, and that's true today. For an existing ASP.NET developer, it doesn't really add much for you. But in the future, if we start doing things like minification and image compression and stuff like that in our projects, we would do that with grunt tasks. And so I think once our customers see that built into the file new experience, then they'll start seeing why that integration is important and why it's cool. But today, it's really for the alpha kind of guy that likes it's already playing with these technologies outside of our stack.
I think a lot of this will make more sense once. Traditionally, you wouldn't see us release these bits until it was being used by file new.
Yep.
Right? Until the project template itself had Bower packages in it, for example. That hasn't happened yet because we just released the first preview of it. Perhaps we wouldn't have done that in the past, released 5 v6s just to get feedback from the small community that's already using it. But that's kind of how we roll now. Yeah. We're trying to get feedback on individual pieces as we're going, so we can course correct as necessary. And the trends move pretty quick too in the industry, so we don't want to be caught with our pants down in a year from now going, here's grunt. Everyone goes, that's great. Welcome to 2 years ago, right? We want to show that we are looking at supporting the thing that is current now with a view to evolving it over time, which again is a little bit different to what we've done in the past. We would do a major release every couple of years. We may or may not have some feature in there, but this time we're doing everything in the open. So.
Yeah, in the old world, we'd wait for some huge marketing event. We can't talk about anything. We want to highlight all the features and all this kind of stuff, and we'd have some huge marketing event. And now we want to go get the feedback immediately. I'd rather not spend a year working on a feature and then find out nobody wants it. I'd rather put the code out now and see if people are interested in it. And so I think you will see the grunt stuff be way more used by the time we get to a beta stage on the next version of Visual Studio. By that time, we should have it integrated into File New.
Yeah, but that's a good point. Once you do File New in some major release, some beta or something, File New MVC will most likely use jQuery from Bower and most likely be doing JavaScript combination and minification using a grunt task by default. That you'll just do File New when you do build, it just does it, and then you launch and everything just works.
But it won't be in your face either. If you don't care about it, it'll just run and it's good.
Yep.
Just like the minification that we have that runs in the runtime today just runs and you don't have to worry about it. So it's there for if you want to get down into it and actually add your own grunt tasks, go for it. We'll be extensible that you do that. If not, we'll do all the common stuff for you automatically.
And I think your blog post today really hit on a lot of the points around that. We didn't want to have to reinvent the world. There's a whole community around doing client-side build tasks and management, and why go and build something new when the community's already decided that these tools are great and they work really well. And this whole using Node.js as a tooling platform, which is automatically cross-platform because we have great Windows support now and obviously Mac support, is a win-win for everybody. So.
Right. So JavaScript is this virtual machine of its own. Everyone's got it on their machines. You're writing a whole bunch of JavaScript on the client. Hey, look, your client-side package management and build tools are JavaScript 2. Again, everybody wins. But that doesn't obviate the need for an MS build on the server necessarily, or NuGet for server packages. It's not that Bower replaces that. It's that you've got package management as a solved problem, or largely becoming a solved problem, depending on whether it's Bower or NPM that wins. And we'll have some task runner that will handle that, regardless of who wins. We don't want to necessarily pick a winner.
It's also an acknowledgement that client-side development is universal across all web platforms. Doesn't matter if you use PHP, Ruby, ASP.NET, or Node. You have to deal with dealing with images and CSS and JavaScript and HTML. That never changes. So why have 4 different tool sets from 4 different vendors when we can all just unify on the one similar workflow built on top of a Node.js toolset?
The big change here too is we want to embrace the tools that the public is using. So if we see tools that the community out there is using, we want to embrace those inside of Visual Studio.
Put our Visual Studio bent on top of it and make it easier to use for more people.
Okay. And a question here about, is there any kind of future version of .NET Framework that isn't necessarily Mono, or is Microsoft going to get involved in Mono more, and what kind of things are we doing to enable the Mac experience to be a good one?
We are actively working with the Mono team to try to figure exactly what that story is going to mean. So in the long term, I think a goal from the group would be that we'd love to have a supported ASP.NET on Mac and Linux. If that's Mono, then we would love to help the Mono team. If that means opening up our licenses to let them copy code or us contributing to their code, we're open to all those ideas to help make that a better platform.
Okay. Cool. And let me see here. Other questions. Oh, someone wants to know about, they're working on an ASP.NET MVC project right now, and now they're afraid that if vNext is coming soon, that converting is going to be a huge problem. Can you talk about whether people who are starting brand new projects should freak out, and what will their conversion be like in the future?
Well, they're just going to run a magical tool, and their app will just run. No, that's...
So we are doing a tool. It'll probably do a best effort and give you suggestions on what things changed. But there will be kind of a process of having to go through your app and have to change stuff. Running a project, no. There are some things you can do to make sure that you are portable, more portable than less portable. We are working on shims for compatibility.
What would you recommend not to do? What would you avoid?
So, for example, there's some things you can't avoid, like HTTP.current. That's kind of a big one where we don't have that anymore. It's completely gone. And there's a replacement, but it's different enough that it won't just be a drop-in replacement. The DI patterns are completely different in the new world, so that one you can't really work around.
But you can certainly design for DI, right?
But if you are using the resolver, the only difference is kind of the wire up. It's all the same.
But I would even go a little simpler and say, if you're writing an MVC application now, use an IOC container and use DI. Don't hard code dependencies between your controllers and DB factories and whatever else. DI will be in the box in the next system.
Yeah. I see. So the more modular and tidy your code is, as far as where the responsibilities lie, DI for an example, then when it comes time to swap DI out or change some factory, as long as you're clean and using interfaces and not really kind of running around inside of Reflection doing stuff you probably know you ought not do, and it will be an orderly upgrade process.
Yeah. Depending on how deep you customize the MVC pipeline itself, you may or may not feel pain or not. So I mean, there's some things that are still there and some things that are completely gone.
And also bear in mind
abstractions, but for the most part,
I mean, the other thing I think just to mention is that while we're calling this ASP.NET vNext right now, and it'll probably have a number after it that's bigger than 1 when we ship, I would think of this like a V1.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways. And we're not promising that everything you can do now in ASP.NET, which has been around for 14 years, and a lot of the API mimics ASP Classic, which was around for 4 years before that. We're not promising you'll be able to do everything you can do in that in version 1.
Especially version 1.
Or even version 2.
I was going to say, this is a reboot.
It's a reboot.
And as part of a reboot, we're going to try to get as much back in the first version as possible, but there will be edges.
There will be edges, and there are some things that for V1, certainly, we will just not support. So, don't use VB. We don't have VB support right now. I don't think we're planning on it for V1, as far as I know. So, if you want to be able to move from an MVC5 project you create today to an ASP.NET vNext MVC project, next year sometime, don't use VB. Don't use the Web Forms View Engine. Use the Razor View Engine. Use an IOC container would be very good. Use the latest version of EF. Things like that.
What if you have
and avoid HTTP
current?
What if your project uses a lot of HTTP modules and custom things, like as David said, messing around inside the pipeline and kind of counting on
the new world.
There are no modules in the new world.
So I mean,
there are ways you can run in IIS the same-ish way, but the managed pipeline is pretty much different.
Right, and there are seams that exist today. There are techniques you can do today to make multiple apps sort of work together and appear to be one app from a user's point of view. They will still work. I mean, you'll still be able to write a system web-based app in IIS and then have a sub-application of that which runs in a separate app pool, but it's actually a sub-app from IIS's point of view, be a K application, and maybe even vice versa. I don't know if we've got that far yet.
People today use that same technique to run a 2.0 app and a 4.0 app underneath it, and do mixes of those combinations.
And sharing auth cookies between apps. That we've supported this forever because it's just a cookie. You just need to be able to issue it and validate it. We'll certainly make sure that we can support sharing authentication between an MVC5 app, Web API 2, Signaler 2 app, and a vNext app. And we'll want feedback on those things about how far do we have to go in a V1 or maybe a V2 to make those seams a little bit nicer.
Interesting observation here from Aaron Powell, who was talking about grunt and gulp, and kind of the way that front-end development is being done on non-ASP.NET things usually involves generated files and a build output of some kind, while in ASP.NET, when you hit Control F5, it just kind of happens and tends to do more things at runtime. How do you see in the future of ASP.NET vNext this idea of generated client-side builds relating to the server-side build, as far as that output of that build is a little different?
Yeah, so definitely in looking at adding grunt and gulp support, which is what we're doing, it's an acknowledgement that there's really no runtime client file manipulation going on. So again, our file new and our development experience will be in K, or vNext will be built around that assumption. In fact, today we were just meeting about project structure and layout, and what type of folders will we have. So the idea right now is that there'd be a dedicated folder in your, so if this is your project, foo, underneath that there will be a dedicated folder called www-root, and you can call this whatever you like.
That totally doesn't work, by the way.
What's that?
You can't see the whiteboard.
Oh, okay. Is it too glaring? Okay.
Yeah, it's too glaring.
Yeah, white on white.
Imagine you're looking at Visual Studio, and one thing is your project, and underneath that there's a folder. The folder is called www-root, or whatever you want to call it.
Right.
That folder represents where the web server is rooted for static file handling. And so if you're using, if you're building client-side files, like you're building JavaScript from CoffeeScript or TypeScript, your source CoffeeScript generally won't be served by the web server. It's source. You need to transpile that into JavaScript and then maybe combine it with some more JavaScript and then minify it into even smaller JavaScript, and then that final file is what you actually want the web server to serve. So we will have recommendations and tooling support for that type of workflow in the new Visual Studio project system built for ASP.NET vNext.
Okay, that makes sense. A little bit of a snarky question here, but someone wanted to know if Identity, which is now Identity 2.0, that was rebooted in the latest version of ASP.NET, will change in vNext, or if it'll be similar.
So it carries on, right? So
it's similar.
The thing we called Identity will have a v3.
Yep.
Yeah.
But it'll be targeting vNext applications.
I see. So the reboot, again, I hate to use air quotes, I apologize. The reboot of Identity was appropriately factored as such that when we move into vNext, it's a piece we can bring along with us.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah. Just like there'll be a Signaler version.
Most of the Katana bits.
Yeah, Katana. Katana for
all
example,
the Katana-like middleware has just been ported to run in the K world.
we did Facebook, like OAuth, Twitter,
Cookie,
yeah,
all that stuff, obviously.
It's all there already.
Okay, cool. That's good. Someone I think was worried that would be another reboot.
No, I mean not in the sense. I mean it will be version 3 of ASP.NET Identity. It's just that version 3 will be targeting ASP.NET vNext, just like Signaler 3 will target ASP.NET vNext, and MVC6 targets ASP.NET vNext.
Mm-hmm. All right, cool. And what about like web configs? Do those exist anymore?
Only for IIS.
Okay, so web config is where you put your handlers and your modules and your IIS specific things about.
That's an interesting question. So today we have this thing called Helios that is built on .NET 4.5.1, booting, core CLR. It's kind of bootstrapping based on the full framework, but we are working on a native module for IIS that is pure, like it wouldn't go through hoops to boot the full desktop to run core CLR, for example. So in that world, I'm not 100% sure if web config.
But if you were
At full
using
config
IS URL rewrite,
Yes.
which is a perfectly valid thing to do even in ASP.NET vNext application, you would still use web.config to configure that.
In the system.web server section, not
Correct.
system web section.
So I think it is fair to say that you can pretty much kiss goodbye to system.web as a section in your web.config file in ASP vNext, but system.web server, which drives IS, will still be there if you need those things. I mean, the default application doesn't use anything specifically in IS, so there is no web.config in the default application.
Yeah, there's some Azure flags and stuff that will still live in there as well.
Right.
So.
Question about the global NuGet repository, and how is that? How does that relate to the GAC? Is this GAC 2.0?
No,
nothing to do with the GAC at all.
It's more of a cache. So think of it as on your machine. If you did file new project nowadays, you'd have a package explorer in each project, and that has a bunch of packages that are copied and do the exact same things for all the projects in your system. Imagine having that be a global place so that you're not using up this space copying those same packages over and over. So all it really is pointing to packages somewhere else on your hard drive.
There's no version policy.
There's no version
here.
policy.
So there's no, I'm going to map this to some other version, or I'm going to force everything to this version. If your app depends on version 1.1.1,
you get that.
You either get 1.1.1 or you'll fail.
Yeah, it's really just the place on disk
where
the loader looks and downloads packages to. That's really all it is.
No versioning at all.
Exactly.
That's part of the model.
Right.
And while you're talking about that and pointing and versioning, how does servicing work for this? Like,
Good
how does
question.
that fit in?
We'll get back to you when we figure it out.
We have plans, but
we have plans.
Okay.
They're not.
But our servicing plans will be 0 day. So today we actually, via a variety of Windows updates, we patch the .NET framework all the time. To the point that a lot of developers get in a situation where their dev box doesn't actually resemble their server box, and that's something we don't want to have happen in this world. So minus a 0 day is the only time we'll actually patch you via Microsoft Update. Outside of that, if you want to patch, you'll have to come and grab it from NuGet.
So the global NuGet cache is a package cache, not a runtime GAC. So even though it has the word global, like John was saying, it's not something to be afraid of.
So for example, if you put 1.00 alpha 1 of package MVC in your JSON file, you will get that version. If you put version 2 in your global folder, the runtime won't say, oh, you have version 2 there, let me use that version instead. Your app still controls the policy. So it's all about storing it on disk somewhere else. One thing to be aware of is if you put 1.00 star in there, that means kind of get me the highest version of 1.00 in my cache. So you can end up in a situation where you're getting roll forward, but you ask for it. So it's not implicit. It's your app choosing what to do with the package ID and version.
Cool. So we are at about the end of the hour. The intention is to do these Hangouts every week about the same time. So that would be Tuesdays at 3 Pacific. And folks can ask questions. We'll try to stay up on the YouTube video. All these will be posted, and we'll try to follow up a little bit. And maybe in the future, bring a couple more people into the Hangout who have maybe committed to the project, or third parties and open source folks who've been involved. Where is the primary place for people to talk about this and be involved? Is it the GitHub issues at github/ASP.NET?
ASP.NET/home for getting started, and there's a very active Jabber room, ASP.NET vNext, where people who are hacking on the thing and learning about how to put stuff together and get started talk to each other.
Put links to these in this Hangout if we can. So
yeah.
And just in case people are unclear about that, of course, Jabber is JABBR.net, and it's kind of like IRC, except it runs on ASP.NET, and SignalR running on Azure, which is pretty shiny.
Yay.
Cool. Thanks so much, John Galloway, David Fowler, Scott Hunter, and Damian Edwards, and for everyone here at the ASP.NET team. Thank you very much, and we'll see you again next week.